presentation this evening is called The Times of Daniel 7:25. Now, if we do a very brief catch up, you'll remember that we spent over the last 2 weeks, in fact, we were looking at this dream that Daniel had where he saw these fabulous beasts that were arising, and he saw them one after the other, and we got down to the last beast, and we saw in Daniel chapter 7 and verse 25 there were 4 clauses that help us to identify the beast. Now, you may remember that verse 17 told us that a beast represents a king or a kingdom. So we've identified Babylon as the first beast that came up, Medo-Persia as the second beast, Greece was the third beast, then came the Roman Empire, and now we're down to this last power that speaks great words against the Most High. It blasphemes, it wears out the saints of the Most High, it persecutes, and we found last week where it thinks to change times and laws. And I think you'll agree with me that really we're identifying this power as the Roman Catholic Church, as this power that came up from the 6th century that became quite an oppressive power, persecuting power. You may remember we spoke about how there were 50 million people that were killed by this power because they had a different belief system. And so now we're going to look at this period of time when this power is going to persecute the saints for a time, times, and the dividing of time. Now, this is an interesting statement here because it doesn't actually give us a specific time. In fact, it uses the word time in almost an obscure way because it says time, times, and dividing of time. So let's see if the Bible gives us some insight into what that's talking about. And we're going to go to Revelation chapter 12. Now, in Revelation chapter 12, if you begin in verse 1, and let me remind you, as always, please copy down these verse references. Make sure that you're able to go through and understand specifically what we're talking about. In Revelation chapter 12 and verse 1, it says this, and it says, "There appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head there was a crown of 12 stars." Now here is this woman that is there, and as we go through, we go down to verse 14, and it says, "To this woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place," because she is being attacked by the serpent that's there. Now, the serpent, I don't think we really need to describe exactly what a serpent is, because the Bible is fairly clear on that. It says that old serpent, the dragon, Satan. Satan is going to attack this woman. So the woman is given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where we are told she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the face of the serpent. Now, here again, we get this same description. We saw it in Daniel 7:25. Now we're seeing it in Revelation 12:14. This description of times, and the times are described in this way as being a time, times, and dividing of times. So once again, we want to look at and see exactly what's being referred to here. We're going to turn in our Bibles to Daniel 7:25, but this time, as you can see here, we're looking at, I'm looking at the Hebrew interlinear Bible. Now, what does that mean? Well, basically, as you can see from the words that are up there on the screen, we're looking at the Hebrew words, and underneath them, there's the English words. And the reason is because we discussed this last week, that if you look at what the Hebrew words actually mean, it gives you a good understanding of what it's referring to. So for those of us that have got these Hebrew or Greek dictionaries where we can look up the words, you'll see it's 2166. That's the word which we're looking at, times, there. And in Daniel chapter 11 and verse 13, it says the following. It says, and shall certainly come after certain years. And if you look in a King James version of the Bible, you will see in the margin where it says years, it says times. So it's telling us that times here also represents years. So we can actually translate what was being said in Daniel 7:25, and they shall be given into his hand until a year and years and the dividing of a year. Now, that helps us a little bit, but also we get more interesting information when we go back to Revelation 12. So we're going to flip back to Revelation 12 again. And in Revelation 12:6, there you can see it says, and the woman fled into the wilderness where she has a place prepared of God that they should feed her 1,260 days, or 1,260 days. Now, it seems once again we've got another period of time to look at, but there appears to be some correspondence. What's the correspondence? Well, let's have a look, and we're going to look at the way that Jewish people were looking at time. If you look at the Jewish calendar, you will see that 1 year is equal to 360 days. In fact, they had 12 months to a year, and very conveniently, each month had 30 days. And so you had your 360-day year. It's not, obviously, it's not an exact solar year. And yes, they would have to put time in to balance those times. That's why the Jewish calendar is a little bit out of sync with the calendar that we use at the moment. But let's look at something interesting. Remember, we're looking at times, times, and half a time. Well, 1,260 days, if you divide that by 360, you get 3.5. Or in other words, what you're looking at is 1 year, a time, 2 years, times, and half a year, half or a dividing of time. So let's see how that fits in with what we're looking at. Now, you remember we've already looked at this idea of a day representing a year as well. So where we look at this 1,260 days, we can then bring in this principle from Ezekiel chapter 4, verses 3 and 6, I'm quoting here, where it says, "This shall be a sign to the house of Israel. You will bear the iniquity of the house of Judah 40 days. I have appointed you each day for a year." And that was one of the two witnesses that we looked at. The second witness was Numbers chapter 14 and verse 34, which said, "After the number of days in which you searched out the land, even 40 days, each day for a year, will you bear your iniquities, even 40 years, and you will know the breach of promise." Now, we want to then see, can we fit this time scale in with what we know already? Now, if we go to the year 538, remember that was the year when the Bishop of Rome was able to use his power. Do you remember we looked at the dividing up of the old Roman kingdom, and we saw how it was divided up into 10 specific groups, 10 specific nations, and that out of those nations, 3 of them were taken away. And so we ended up with the 7 nations that were left. And that was in the year 538 when Belisarius was helping the Roman Emperor Vigilus to go out and to exercise his power. So we have this quotation from the History of the Christian Church, volume 3, page 237, which says, "Vigilius ascended the papal chair in 538 AD under the military protection of Belisarius. The legally recognized supremacy of the Pope began in that year, in 538, when there went into effect the decree of the Emperor Justinian, which made the Bishop of Rome head over all the churches, but also the definer of doctrine and the corrector of heretics. And this was the power that he had. And you remember that Justinian said that the laws that the Pope brought in would also be brought in to his law, so they would be actually law in the land. So we've got a date where we can start this time of 1,260 years, or the times and dividing of time. We start from 538. That's when Vigilius was able to go out and to exercise his authority. Now, I know it's getting a little bit late in the evening, but let's do a bit of maths. If we add 1,260 to 538, what do we get? Yes, I can hear you all calling out the answer. Indeed, we get to 1798. Now, what happened in 1798? Now, I'm going to give you a quick reference here. This one is not going to make too much sense because it's dealing with something which is to come, but Revelation 13 verse 3, here's a little bit of a teaser, because we're going to look at two beasts that are referred to in Revelation 13. Remember, a beast meaning a kingdom, so two kingdoms that are there. And Revelation 13:3 says, I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death. Now, what is being spoken about is our friend Napoleon Bonaparte. You remember in the, I think it was the first presentation we did on Daniel 2, we looked at Napoleon Bonaparte and what he got up to. He was one of those who wanted to conquer the world. And in the year 1797, Napoleon Bonaparte was traveling around Europe, he was conquering, and he then went into the papal territories in Rome. As we're told here, he rapidly overran them. He had orders from the French Directory to destroy the papal government. Now, let's just put this a little bit in context. Where in France, at the end of the 18th century, it is the French Revolution that's taking place. Now, in the French Revolution, Voltaire, who was living at that time, he said, within one generation, the Bible will be unknown. We are going to destroy God in this place. And it's interesting that where Voltaire wrote those words, he sat at a desk, wrote the words, within a generation, God will be dead, the Bible will be forgotten. That place still exists today. Where he wrote those words is now used as a place to store Bibles. Sometimes I think that God has a sense of humor. Man stands up and says, I'm going to get rid of this book. And God says, just wait, we'll see what happens. So the French Directorate said to Napoleon, we want you to go to Italy. We want you to go and take the Pope off his throne, bring him into captivity, because we're going to bring down this Christian power that's there. Now, Napoleon went to Rome. He continued his conquests and his attacks, but as you can see there, he disregarded the instructions that he had. And instead of bringing the Pope off his throne, he actually concluded a peace deal with him. It was known as the Peace of Tolentino, and it was formed in the, on the 19th of February, 1797. So 1797, the Pope has a peace deal made with Napoleon. Now, let's just pause for a second. You see the date that we've got there on the screen, 19th of February, 1797. Now, we took the year 538 and we added 1,260 years to it. And what date did we get to? Yes, we got to 1798. But here we're talking about Napoleon in 1797. Let's look and see what happens. Napoleon goes back to France and he says to the directorate there, look, I've been over to Rome. I've proclaimed a peace treaty with the Bishop of Rome. So he's at peace with us now. He's not a problem. But the directorate said, that's not what we asked you to do. We asked you to go and take the Pope off his throne. if you can't do that, then we're going to send somebody else to do it. And indeed, that's what they did. They sent Berthier, General Berthier, to go and take the Pope off his throne. Now, by now, we've gone through the summer of 1797, and now we're coming into the autumn. Berthier is told by the Directorate, go to Rome, go and take the Pope off his throne, but there is a problem. To get to Rome, he's going to march his army from the south of France across over the Alps and then down through Italy to get to Rome. And he can't actually do that because winter is coming in. And so because winter is setting in, he has to winter his army. And he stays and he waits until the snows have melted and he's able to get across through the Alps. And then he goes into Italy and he proclaims the restoration of the Roman Republic. He takes Pope Pius VI as a prisoner, strips him of all his property, removes him to France, where he's detained in captivity. When did he do this? Well, by the time the snows had melted, by the time he'd marched across the Alps and got down to Rome, it was now 1798 when he did this. And he proclaimed a publication there. He published this proclamation saying the Roman people are restored to their rights of sovereignty by proclaiming their independence, by assuming the government of ancient Rome and by constituting the Roman Republic. He went on to say, all temporal authorities proceeding from the Pope are therefore suppressed and shall exercise no functions whatsoever. The Roman Republic, acknowledged by the French Republic, comprehends all the territory which remained under the temporal authority of the Pope, and after the Treaty of Campo Forinio. And he then went on to say that when the people of Rome came out to meet Berthier, they presented him with a crown of olive branches. And this was the old sign of the Caesars, which they gave to him. And as he accepted it, he said, actually, it belongs to General Bonaparte, because it was his actions that prepared the way for Berthier to go over there and to capture the Pope. Now, the interesting thing that you will notice here, that if Napoleon had captured the Pope in 1797, prophecy would not have been fulfilled. So it was left to Berthier. And when did he take the Pope off his throne? It was almost exactly a year later. Do you remember it was the 19th of February, 1797, when Bonaparte was there? For Berthier, it was the 10th of February in 1798 that he actually entered Rome. And you will see that report that was there in the newspaper was dated the 12th of March of that date. So 1798, he takes the Pope prisoner, he destroys papal power after the exact number of years that was prophesied in the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation. Just as the Bible foretold, this power, the papal church, held sway from 538 to 1798, a period of 1,260 years, a times and dividing of time, and it was an absolutely accurate amount of time. In fact, the Apostle John wrote in John chapter 10, verse 35, he said, the scriptures cannot be broken. Peter also agreed with him and said, we have a more sure word of prophecy, whereunto you do well that you take heed, as unto a light that shineth in a dark place, until the day dawn and the day star arise in your hearts. He goes on to say, knowing this first, that no prophecy of the scripture is of any private interpretation, for the prophecy came not in old time by the will of man, but holy men of God spoke as they were moved by the Holy Ghost. Now, we're going to conclude here. I know that it's a short presentation this evening, but if we go any further, we're going to get into a whole new topic, which is going to take us probably another hour to go through. But this brings us to the conclusion of looking at Daniel 7:25. I think you will see from what we've looked at that when you put these four clauses together, we've identified that power that rises up at the end of time as being the Roman Catholic Church. Now, one of the things you might be saying is, yes, but okay, this power held sway for 1,260 years, and then its time was taken away. Berthier went in there, removed the Pope. Yes, we can see all of that. But what about today? The Pope is there in the Vatican today. He has quite a good influence around the world. Does this mean that papal power comes back up again? Now, you remember this beast of Daniel 7:25, it lasts right through until the end. And then in the end, we start to talk about the return of Christ. So what we're going to do in the next study that we do is to move into the book of Revelation. Now, when we go into